Hello and welcome. My name's Ellie Buttrose and I'm the Curator of Contemporary Australian Art at the Queensland Art Gallery and Gallery of Modern Art in Brisbane, Australia, on the unceded lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people. This artist discussion is presented in conjunction with the 10th Asia Pacific Triennial of Contemporary Art, also known as APT10. Today's conversation will explore how Triennial artists Yasmin Smith and Hu Yun engage with the natural environment as both the subject and the material basis of their artworks. It's my great pleasure to welcome Yasmin Smith here in Australia and Hu Yun, who's joining us from Serbia. So to kick off today's session, could you please tell us a quick overview of your projects in APT and also how you came to use the plants that we see in your respective projects?
My project for APT10 is called A Flooded Rose Red Basin, and it's a work that I produced while I was in residency in China in 2018. The work itself is a collection of two different types of plants, ceramic casts of specimens of plants that I collected while I was on the residency. And they actually are wall hung next to one another. One is ceramic bamboo stems and the other is ceramic eucalyptus branches. And each set of different plant specimens has been glazed using the ashes of the original plants. And I chose these different plants because to start off my initial research, when I knew that I was going to do this project, I was looking into bamboo and its potential future applications in to be phytomined for biosilica and how this could be used in technologies where silica is used as a semiconductor, like things in mobile phones and satellites. While I was on the residency, I noticed that there was plantations of Australian native trees like all over the place surrounding the green tea plantations. This was in Sichuan. And the sort of striking differences between the different types of trees that originate from different locations, but here sharing the same kind of ecology. And I was really interested just to explore through the glaze and through the ceramic objects, their form and their chemical compositions and how they related to one another, how they related to the soils, and also how they related to human activities that were taking place in this location.
My project for this time, the APT10, is titled, It is Not Mine to Give, Nor Yours to Take. It's a project I'm trying to look at the mining, both in the historical context and also, let's say, the future, one of the options we have for the future mining. So for the history of mining, especially in the state of Victoria, where I spent almost 18 months, I tried to trace some of the footsteps of the Chinese diggers in Victoria. And I visited those several historical digging sites again and again, just to try to imagine how their life was. At the same time, I encountered this super amazing research, which is happening actually in Queensland University, in one of the professor, Dr. Anthony van der End, and in his lab, which they're doing this research about the super plants, which is hyperaccumulator plants, which can be possibly used for clean the tailing of the mine or to be one of the method for mining in the future. But they're still study the possibilities, and they're still try to understand why those plants can really live with those heavy metals, contain those heavy metals.
Could you also tell us a little bit more about the techniques that you use for your projects? For instance, the pigments that you've used in your paintings, Hu Yun, and also Yasmin, the way you've used ash glazes on your ceramics.
So during the process of nature printing, which I used for my watercolor drawing paper, I try to just pick or just to find any plants, tree barks, dry leaves, flowers, seeds, which I can find in the digging fields, and to blend them into the process of boiling the paper. And then they will somehow appear or partly appear on the paper or inside the paper as a kind of beautiful patterns. And on the other side, I'm working with those scientists from the university lab to, they give me the list of plants, which consider like the most common hyperaccumulator plants. And then according to those plants, together with them, we find a list of metals and metal elements. Lucky enough, I got collaboration with this amazing paint maker, David Coles, who willing to help me to, according to this list of metal elements, he helped me to kind of transform them into a beautiful watercolor paint, which I used later for my drawing. So at the end, which the audience is going to see is the this interesting combination of my drawing of those hyperaccumulator plants together with the this laser scan of the inside part of those plants, which made by Professor Anthony using this synchrodrome laser beam scan. So these like, and we have this interesting structure to show these two images back to back in the space.
I mentioned when I arrived in China, I was initially looking at the bamboo, and we had already organized some of this bamboo to be collected and burnt. And this is how I would usually start the project or any project off, is that I go to a particular location that interests me or has an interesting history between humans and plants. I collect the specimens of the plants and I make plaster molds of these specimens. And then we'll actually burn down the plants to ash. And I do this because when you burn plants, you actually burn away all the carbon, and left inside the ash are the inorganic elements, such as metals and non-metals and other elements, the elements that you would find on the periodic table. So the reason that they're in the trees to start off with is because the trees have taken this from the soil where they grow. So depending on the location where the tree is grown, you'll have different chemical compositions that form the makeup of the tree. So the tree is a way, kind of like a record keeper of the site. So after I've collected the ash, I then make a ceramic glaze from those inorganic elements. And I can do this because ash itself is already contains all of the elements necessary to make a glaze. But it doesn't have a melting point that it needs to in a functional ceramic kiln, which is about, my temperature is 1200 degrees. That would go up to 1300 degrees Celsius. So I add a couple of other glaze materials that are non-coloring that help the glaze to melt at that temperature. So this goes through a process of, I suppose, fusion. And the metal elements that are present in that ash, those inorganic elements, then become visible within the glaze. So this is sort of how I approach. I've been doing this process since about 2014, and I'm creating a kind of an archive of places through the trees that have grown there. So that sort of direct relationship between the tree and the soil is evident in the glaze by the aesthetics of the glaze. But there's also a couple of other things that will be responsible for the presence of certain inorganic elements. So the three things that really will have an effect on those inorganic elements in the ash, and therefore the aesthetic of the glaze, is one would be the natural biology of the tree. Like, for example, as you were explaining, are they hyperaccumulators of certain things? So bamboo, for instance, is a hyperaccumulator of silica. And it takes silica from the soil and it deposits this within its cells, and it forms things called phytoliths, which translates to plant stones. So I kind of knew this about bamboo already, and because silica is also so important to the ceramic process, I kind of had an inkling that this would create a very unique bamboo ash glaze. Yeah, and then the process of making the molds, after I've made the molds of the specimens of the trees and burnt down the organic matter, collected the ash to make a glaze. I then make ceramic casts of the original specimens. And that's done through a process of slip casting. And for this project, my studio was a industrial ceramics sanitary ware factory. So they were making sinks and toilets and things in this sort of industrial agricultural area in the Chengdu Plain. We used their slip, so we used their industrial stoneware slip to make the objects in this artwork. And the factory workers actually helped me to produce the molds, and I fired them in their industrial kilns. And yeah, that's pretty much the process technical information to the process.
You both have quite research-based practices. And so could you tell us a little bit about your methodology and how the scientific data influences your aesthetic choices?
For me, it really, this time is the, I would say the first formal collaboration between me and the scientist, Professor Anthony from the university. I would say I don't have any let's say the pre-thinking of what's the work going to look like. So it's really the process is leading the entire project, which is growing in a way by itself. So I still remember by visiting his lab and listening to his introduction of the research they're doing in the lab. It's really it's already really fascinating, both on the science level also for me, and also on the I would say a visual impact. So there are very strong visual elements embedded in the research itself, and not to mention this super interesting collage he's making actually for the lab. Basically what he's doing is every time when he go to the synchrodrome to have all those scan of different plants, and then later he will use those scan image to make a collage to show different kind of parts of the plants and different kind of plants, and to compare them together in order to have a clear image to show all the differences and all the parts of the plants, which this remind me a lot of these 19th century or even earlier 18th century these plants illustrations, which we see in those museum collections. So it's basically same concept, but with a very different technology and with a different way to present. So for me, all these elements are really slowly forming the shape of the project, instead of me as an artist to try to control what I want the work really look like. For me, I would say in this project, my position, I would very much prefer to be a mediator between the part from the science and also the part from these historical sites, of those digging sites, as where every time when I visited those digging sites, actually the landscape pretty much stay as it is. It's not there. You won't find a big change in that area, but through those environment, it's give me a lot of informations. And at the same time, at the end, actually for the nature printing process, I just choose the things I can find, basically. So I don't make any I don't have any rules to select what I want to put on the paper. And even like before I try nature printing, I just left the paper on the ground in the forest for a few days actually. And then actually that's how I came this idea to actually use nature printing, because as I left the paper there, like there are several rings, and those natural elements already kind of partly dissolve into the paper. So I found this is a beautiful way to kind of, for me, it's also some kind of scanning, but in a natural way, I would say, like to let the nature do it by itself. So and later, and then by boiling it in the water I used from nearby pond, because the water has contained a lot of gum tree leaves, so the color is really strong, has this red brownish color, so it gave a really beautiful layer to the final paper. So yeah.
Yeah, well, I would have to agree that there's so much about our projects where there's a lot that is actually already, the activities or the performances are done by the plants themselves. It's already embedded within the material, but as artists, we're sort of presenting the scaffold on which to put this information out there. So I was thinking about what you were saying and looking at like making choices about what plants to choose. Well, I guess with a lot of the works that I do, and this work particularly, all those choices came about as an evolution of the time spent and what I observed in that space. And I can come to the location with a certain amount of pre-knowledge. Like, for example, as I was talking about just before, how the glaze is determined by certain elements. One is the biology of the plant, for example, which I can learn before I go there. I can study it. And then I can also look at the geology of that site, which is the sort of the second element that is going to affect the inorganic elements that are involved in this plant's life cycle. I saw in Sichuan, the area was known as the Red Basin because the soils there are so full of red sandstone and purple mudstone. So I can learn a little bit about that history and that sort of deep time geology. And then I also take into the pre-planning stage some knowledge about other human activities that have taken place at that site, because this would be the sort of the third element that really is going to have an effect on that aesthetic that is there. So has there been any large-scale agriculture where there's been the use or input of chemicals for pesticides, or has there been any mining? Has there been massive interventions into the landscapes, like canals and rivers that have been dredged, for example? So all of these things I can kind of like put in place in a sort of like a solar system, but then when I get there, there's a lot of chance, I suppose, in what's going to be available to me at that moment in time. And then I have no knowledge of, actually when I start, what the glaze is going to turn out to look like. Really, that is sort of determined by the life of the tree itself. And I'm kind of an actor in this phase of bringing that out to the viewer, to the audience, or to explaining that, bringing that knowledge into an aesthetic form. So in terms of how my aesthetic choices, I actually try to keep them quite minimal when I do an installation, because there's so much information that's already embedded within the material. The only thing that I do is I look at the landscape from which that they came, and I take any kind of formal structures. So for example, the eucalyptus are sort of set out as if they're like a plantation stand of trees, and the bamboo can kind of be interpreted as a sort of a cluster of bamboo. So I just take these really simplified versions of how they existed in their natural environment and sort of translate that to the final installation. And in terms of the way in which science influences my aesthetic choices, I'm not sure exactly how that happens, but I do go through a lot of scientific processes in order to gain the information that I need to fully try to understand the situation that I'm in. So with every glaze that I produce, I actually, before I make the glaze, or after I make the glaze generally, because I don't have the time to get the results back before I make the glaze, I take the ash to a lab and I get that tested for 52 different elements, mainly metals, but some non-metals, because in a glaze, the metals are what create the color. So things like iron oxide will produce browns, yellows, reds, oranges. Copper will produce a green glaze. Chromium green, manganese will produce a purple glaze. So on the periodic table, there's like 118 different elements, and 61 of them are really significant to ceramic processes and the outcome of glazes. So when I have this sort of empirical ordering of a list of what they look like, I can then take that knowledge and compare that to what I see in the glaze and kind of make sort of speculative assumptions about why certain elements are present in that tree in that site. Is it related to the geology? Is it really related to the plant's biology? Or are there some kind of external human factors? And how have all these three things come together to create a sort of a snapshot of that moment in time?
Huyen, you were also looking at the metals to use in your paints. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that process? I saw you nodding quite a bit when Yasmin was speaking.
Yeah, as Yasmin just mentioned, actually, there are a lot of metals also appeared in this part of the research in the those hyperaccumulate plants. For example, manganese is one of the elements which appeared in macadamia, actually. As most of us actually, it's hard to imagine like it's a delicious this nut, but actually the manganese is not in the nut. It only contains in the leaf of macadamia tree. Yeah, by knowing this is like when Anthony provided me this list, I immediately think about the color, because I go back to the original of those like those basic colors. They all, yeah, contains basically the same metal elements. So then how this came out is just to look for those colors. It's like when you get a story, you trace back from the ending to the beginning. So yeah, and through help of David, we managed to. I mean, he made me this set of watercolor paints, which also interesting because there's a lot of new thing for him, because I mentioned that I'm going to draw on a nature printed paper, but he couldn't like sure like some of the color might have a kind of reaction to some of the things I put into the paper. So nobody knows what's going to happen and how the color will look like, but it came out really interesting. And also like some of the color like azurite is like he warned me like maybe this color, because this color usually will not be in the form of watercolor, so it will very fast dried out, so which is true actually. Luckily, like after I made the drawing, like the color already, now the color is like a stone, hard like stone, so I can't really use it anymore. I mean, I can use it but not as a watercolor paint. So yeah, there's a lot of uncertainties in the process and a lot of like these kind of unknown excitement. And also for the nature printing part, I did some tests before with a small size of paper, but I will not know like what's the outcome going to be, because for this 10-meter long roll, like it will be, and also like from parts to parts, they're really different. I guess because yeah, they are different positions inside the water when they're boiling, so the color are really different. The shape of those leaves, yeah, the shapes of those leaves are really different, but which creates a really interesting pattern.
You've both mentioned this element of chance in your practice. And so I was hoping you could elaborate on how you keep your practice open to this idea.
I think chance is for me, it's sort of about being open to what the world has to throw at you. You have to be reactory to the things that you find and the opportunities that are available to you. And also, I suppose there's just so much chance in the ceramic process because, things could blow up in the kiln, or, also it's about ridding your mind of expectations. You might find one glaze that someone might describe or you might feel is beautiful, and then another one which is maybe not, doesn't hold like that like beautiful like looking aesthetic to it, but is interesting and has its own sort of has its own unique code to it. Yeah, I don't know about chance, because I think that it's also predetermined, as we said before. There is so much chance in what you can in what's going to happen in your experiences with making work, but at the same time, like, these trees have been and these plants have been existing on this earth for like 380 million years, and they've been adapting, and they've been learning how to absorb and live in this environment. So their knowledge is so deep and old that what exists inside them is so predetermined to before we even arrived on the planet. And so therefore it's like, we're just sort of learning, we're just becoming, we're just being able to see what already exists.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I would also add, like, if the chance also, of course, it appeared during the process of making the work, but it also, there's another important part, which chance is also played an important role in the process of research as well. Like it always, I feel like it's always like I will never like set a goal in my research, because there's no goals and there's no like destinations in a way. Like, so it's always like next process is leading me to another part of the road. So it's yeah, it's I would rather say like I'm following the chance, like and try to be friend with chance. You know.
Yeah, I think it's about being flexible in all of these things that you're given, and not having too many constraint boundaries. Although my methodology is really constrained in what I apply to everything, because I'm trying to sort of create a comparative visual analysis of things in different locations and geographies and histories. But the reality of it is that you're always going to be given something that you didn't expect.
I'm struck by the way that you've both mentioned this sense of deep time or geological transformation in your work, but there's also this sense of kind of rapid impact on the environment. Could you talk about this sense of time that occurs in both your projects?
For this project specifically, I think if you mention about time, it's really interesting, because the project, I mean, the entire work has been made during the pandemic. So I think time played a very special role. As we all know, like in Victoria, we experienced several lockdowns, which like limited the movement within 5 kilometers, which for me is like, even for me, I can't go from Melbourne to Bendigo. Like, so it's really slowed me down. So I have to wait until one open window I can really go there and to see what's happening. And then, like this kind of, really the time is control the entire project, and and it's kind of prolong each process, which I think it's maybe it's good, because it gave me a lot of really time and space to reflect and to also think. So But in general, of course, like even during the making of the work, time is really play a essential part in it, and it's a kind of a main character in all the process, not only in my nature printing process, but also in the this color making, and also the drawing itself, and also it appeared a lot during the process of Professor Anthony, I believe, because this is like for him, it's also in order to get one image, there's a long process, like there's a time in a certain amount of time need to be spent and need to wait. So yeah, it's in the case of my project, I think it's really interesting to think about time.
Yeah, well, I think for me, time is it's kind of encapsulated within the works in both the process and the materials. So we have materials which are very old and deeply connected to the earth, and therefore geological time, and growth as well. Like we have to remember that these plants took a long time to grow. I mean, the bamboo was 1 year old, but that's a long time. And it's come from a lineage that's very old. And then, you know, the idea that also that we're talking about elements that are the beginning of time, you know, that were forged in the middle of stars and that created us. So all of these, like, we are related to time, we are the product of time, as are the plants that we're working with. And I think that the works will show that that's really embedded within them, because of this sort of, these visuals that we're going to get from the work are sort of a reflection of all of that time in one sort of moment that's kind of being captured. Like you said before, it was like a scan. Well, these my artworks sort of do also remind me of the way that, like, you know, a photograph is taken and you get like a sudden accumulation of time in one moment. And then also that, like, the trees that in my case that I've been working with, well, their life ends at that moment. Their particular life ends right there. But all the knowledge that they've accumulated over time is sort of presented and kept and sustained. And I think in terms of that the question about the future applications, well, for my work, well, it did start with looking at that idea of biosilica and what that could mean for future technological use. But also I think about it as well as in that the works are a kind of a message. They're bringing us information from the deep past that we can use in order to improve the future, or the way in which we behave in the future with the earth. And hopefully kind of this really intelligent mechanisms that these trees have to sustain their own lives, and to, for instance, accumulate metals which are highly toxic to other plants or other creatures or humans, that they manage to survive this. And if we can learn about those mechanisms, we're also maybe able to sort of you know, use that knowledge to sort of you know, take our futures into a direction where that will I don't know, like, just improve our earth somehow, heal the earth. I mean, yeah, there's a project that I've been working on at the moment where it's using trees to clean up a dump site. And as you were talking about here, the trees, that some of the plants that you're working with these scientists, they're using to clean up mining sites. So this kind of like phytoremediation, this idea of collaborating with plants or understanding their mechanisms in order to better or heal sort of our common earth, is a really strong and exciting, you know, principle and idea.
Yeah, I think for in terms of the future, I totally agree what Yasmin just mentioned, but I also have one more concern in the more like a context of this phyto mining, this using the hyperaccumulated plants to deal with the polluted earth, and to also in like it's already happening actually in some of the mining field they're collaborating, is to use the plants as turn a certain area into a plantation of certain kind of plants in order to mine. So for me, it's like, I don't know, it's always remind me, this is also the reason I made this project, because looking at those plants, especially reading those plants' names, which I will never remember, and it's so like so long, and in Latin, and so it's remind me a lot of the miners, about of especially like those miners from China, for example, like to go to a foreign land and to mine, so to take what they need in order to survive. And for me, like they're like also like a kind of super plants. So I mentioned this is also because in the context of future, it's like we already have a lot of stressed labors across the world, mostly in the mining fields and in different fields in different areas. And I would say like those super plants might be one of the stressed labor in the future, as well as I believe people are going to move them from place to place, or to introduce the new plants to another totally different environment, which we don't know what's going to happen with the environment, with the plants. So it will take a long time maybe to understand it, but I believe this is coming. So this is also one of the big concern I have towards this future mining, I would say. So it's, yeah, it's if we talk about the future, this is one thing I'm also thinking about.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that there's going to be some ethical questions around the treatment and the way in which human beings are using plants in the future. And yeah, that's going to be the next sort of discussion once.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yasmin and Huyun. It's been such a pleasure to talk to you both and get more of a sense of these really deep and engaged practices. We're so excited to have your work here in APT10.